This thing is going to completely change how I make videos. Let me explain. When Minisforum first reached out to me about taking a look at their UM690, I was initially going to say thanks, but pass. It didn't initially make sense in my head, for my channel at least, but then I remembered a problem I was working on, and it hit me that this mini PC might be the perfect solution for me. See, I'd like to start making it possible for someone else to help me edit videos for the Hardware Haven channel, but trying to copy entire folders of 4K footage over the internet, and then keeping projects in sync with one another, it's just sort of a pain. And I also don't have the space or money to pay someone to actually come work here. So I started looking into the possibility of having a remotely accessible editing machine that would have access to my storage server and therefore all of my footage and assets. I had initially thought to deploy the Lenovo P310 I used a little while back in a Proxmox video, but it wasn't quite as performant as I would have liked compared to the power it would consume 24/7, and also the space it would take up. So then I was considering possibly building something specifically for the task at hand, but that's when I heard from the folks over at Minisforum, and that's where this UM690 comes in. The UM690 is an incredibly compact little PC, sporting an 8-core 16-thread Ryzen 9 6900HX, which has a base clock of 3.3 GHz and a single-core boost of up to 4.9 GHz. The 6900HX is built on TSMC's 6nm FinFET processor node, has 16 MB of L3 cache, and comes with a Radeon 680M integrated GPU, which is based on the RDNA 2 architecture. There are different configurations available, but mine came with 16 GB of DDR5 SODIMM memory, as well as a 512GB NVMe SSD, which came pre-installed with a licensed version of Windows 11 Pro. There's also a slot for adding a 2.5-inch drive in the case, and there's this little jumper cable included in the box for SATA and power. The UM690 has onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and lots of I/O for such a small enclosure. On the front, there's a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, as well as a USB 4 port which supports Thunderbolt, meaning you can add an external GPU or other PCIe device if you want. There's also a power button, 3.5mm combo audio jack, and an external clear CMOS button. On the back, there are 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-A ports, 2 HDMI ports that support 4K at 60Hz, a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, as well as a power jack and Kensington lock. The 6900HX is a beast of a CPU. In Cinebench R23, the Ryzen 9 6900HX managed a multi-threaded score of 12,265, while the i7 9700 in my desktop only managed an 8,904. In the single-threaded test, the Ryzen 9 scored a 1581, while my i7 only managed to score an 1186. Obviously, Cinebench isn't the perfect indicator of performance, and the i7 9700 is getting a bit long in the tooth, but this little guy is still really impressive, especially when you consider things like power draw, noise, and just the sheer tininess of this thing. During the beginning of the Cinebench test, it pulled around 75 watts from the wall, and then throttled down to 65 watts for the remainder of the test run. But while idle at the desktop, it only pulled 9 watts from the wall, and then went down to 2 watts while sleeping. For the performance, that's pretty efficient. While the fan did ramp up during the Cinebench run, it wasn't loud or whiny, and it was basically dead silent at any other time. I didn't really test any games other than briefly playing LEGO Star Wars with it for a bit while my wife and I were traveling, but that can run on a potato. But as a desktop or work machine, this thing can be pretty beastly. Now, I'm very much aware that for many of you, something like this just isn't even close to being affordable. The barebones kit, with no RAM or SSD, is up for pre-sale right now at $500 US, and the configuration I have will run you an extra $150. If you're looking for the absolute best bang for your buck in terms of performance, and don't really need an incredibly small form factor, don't buy this. If you're looking for a great, simple mini PC for desktop use, also don't buy this. However, if the specs on this make sense for you and your workload, and you need something very small, efficient, and quiet, then, in my opinion, this is an incredible value. But is it a good solution for my problem? Well, in regards to CPU performance, holy crap, yeah. This thing performs better than my normal PC thanks to the Ryzen architecture, extra threads, and DDR5 memory. But one huge drawback is the lack of an NVIDIA GPU. And I don't say that because I'm a fanboy or anything, but because I use Adobe Premiere, which really favors the NVIDIA CUDA API. This means that Premiere can't really take advantage of the Radeon graphics, which is a common issue with Radeon GPUs in general, and why you often see professional creators favoring NVIDIA. However, I don't use a lot of effects that take advantage of hardware acceleration, and the scrubbing on the timeline is typically quite a bit more CPU and storage dependent, so this still might be a great little editing machine. Also, I want to take a second to answer a question some viewers might be asking, which is why I didn't virtualize my editing PC. Virtualization is awesome, and the direction that I originally wanted to go in. When I did the part 2 of my Proxmox deep dive with the Lenovo P310, I mostly focused on gaming, but while that system was operational, I played around with Adobe Premiere and, well, it seems like Premiere just doesn't really like to work well in a VM. It would have been so awesome to run an editing VM, as well as a lot of my other services, on this one machine, but for now, I'll just have to deal with running it bare metal. And hey, maybe I can still find some ways to put the Windows machine to use outside of just remote editing. To get things set up, well, it was pretty easy honestly. The UM690 came pre-installed with Windows 11, so I just went through the setup process and then installed Parsec and Adobe Premiere. For networking, I decided to use the 2.5 gigabit port to connect to my 2.5 gigabit switch that also has my main NAS on it. But that network doesn't currently have internet access, so I also hooked up this USB Ethernet adapter to connect to my main network. Parsec is honestly so freaking cool, and within minutes, I was remoted in and playing around, at least on my local network. To make this little guy accessible from the web, I had to enable UPnP on my router, and then restart both the host and client systems. But not long after that, I was remoted in from my MacBook Pro off of a cellular hotspot, and even with crappy reception, I was still able to navigate around Premiere. It was a bit stuttery at times being on such a bad connection, but the UM690 basically just tore through all my video projects without a hitch, and it really wasn't any different than editing off of my main PC. I feel like some aspects of it were even snappier, maybe thanks to the DDR5 or just faster CPU in general. One downside though is that for whatever reason, rendering projects in Premiere was a lot slower than on my desktop. I imagine this is more of a software or lack of CUDA issue though, because the system was barely being utilized. Realistically though, this isn't a big deal, as I'm probably going to be the one in charge of the final render of any video, and I can either do that on my main PC, or just offload it and let it render on this for a while in the background. Not long after getting it all set up, I shared the Parsec link with my friend Anson, and he was able to hop on and start working on videos without any problems. For now, I think I plan to just keep this PC running 24/7 and idle so that he or I can easily remote in. But maybe at some point in the future, I think it could be cool to set up a solution for Wake on LAN, so that I could put this machine to sleep when it's not in use. Let me know in the comments if you have any good solutions or recommendations for that. I also realized that while this machine isn't great for rendering Premiere projects, it's still perfect for offloading transcoding of MP4s to something like ProRes or Cineform, and I'm probably going to set up some shared watch folders so that I can just drop in footage and have the UM690 tackle transcoding while I work on something else. If you have any other cool ideas of how I could put this thing to use with Windows, let me know in the comments below. I think it could be fun to do a follow-up video or something. Like I said earlier, the UM690 from Minisforum probably doesn't make sense for most of you, but if it does, it's pretty sweet, and in my opinion, a really good value. That's about all for this one, but I want to thank Minisforum for sending this over and supporting the hardware channel and really just making all of this possible. I'll have links in the description to pre-order the UM690 if you're interested. And if you want to support the Hardware Haven channel, you can check out my Patreon, where I have early access videos as well as some exclusive content for only $1 a month. That's about it for this one though, so as always, thank you so much for watching, stay curious, and I really hope to see you in the next one.